Our speaker today is Consul General Julian Adem, who will discuss the Wisconsin-Mexico relationship. Since 1994, he has participated directly in documentation functions, protection and care for Mexican communities abroad. Consul General Adem knows all the aspects of consular work and headed the opening of the new Consulate of Mexico in Milwaukee. He has also initiated contacts with local, state, and federal authorities. He has consistently worked to promote trade relations between this state and Mexico. We look forward to your presentation, Consul General Adem, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking with us today. As we welcome him to the podium, please remember, if time permits questions, please wait for one of the audience microphones as this program is being recorded.
Hello. It's an honor to be here to meet with all of you. Thank you, President. Thank you, Ms. Richardson, Mr. Luskin, for having set this up, the President-elect, and all the other Rotarians here present. I am the first consul of Mexico in Wisconsin, and the only career consulate in the state. There are several honorary consuls. I want to tell you that for me, having been the person chosen to open this office after 25 years of continuous service in consulates throughout the United States is really a great honor. I want to talk to you about, yes, the U.S.-Wisconsin, the Mexico-Wisconsin relationship, but we're going to take a look at the U.S.-Mexico trade relationship with the idea of having an overview which will serve us to understand what's going on with NAFTA. So we're going to start by explaining that Mexico is essentially a growing economy. It's the world's 15th largest economy, and each year we continue to grow. So we hope to join the top 10 in the next 10 years, the top 10 economies. And we are the first number one exporter in all of Latin America. And at the same time, we're the fifth recipient of foreign investment. And as well, we are the ninth largest importer, which means we import a lot of things, particularly from Wisconsin. Ours is a $1.2 trillion economy, which is considerable, with a trade of almost $800 billion a year. That's trade inbound and outbound. So it's a country with a great potential, 125 million people. At least 50% of them have what you would call middle-class status. They have buying capacity, purchasing capacity. We see here, because I want to stress the importance of NAFTA. For us, since NAFTA kicked in '94 to the present, trilateral trade between the NAFTA partners, which is U.S., Mexico, and Canada, has increased 245%. And most of that trade has been with the United States. There was a dip during the economic crisis of 2008. It actually occurred in 2009. But then we got back on track again. And so the data that you see there is Mexico-U.S. trade is the green. It's how it's grown in the last 24 years. In particular, with the United States, we see it here, right here. There is a trade imbalance. There is. We admit it. The light blue is what U.S. imports from Mexico. It imports around 60 billion more than you export to the United States. So there is a trade deficit. We recognize it. At the same time, we should bear in mind that Mexico is the U.S. second largest export market and second largest supplier of goods. So we're bound together. It's regardless of individual considerations. The two countries are bound together. It's just how we're going to work out that relationship. I'm going to go quick because there's quite a few slides. I want you to know that our trade is diversified. It's not the trade of 1980, where Mexico just sold crude oil to the United States, and maybe a few very cheap manufacturers or stuff that was assembled in the border, the so-called maquiladora system. Mexico is in fact a powerhouse in auto parts and automobiles. Mexico is the 7th largest producer and 4th worldwide exporter of light vehicles. Mexico, most of the trade between our two countries, a great part of it is in the car and parts industry. And I know many of you probably are aware of this because auto parts are important in this part of the country. Just as a fact, 11% of light vehicles sold in the U.S. were produced in Mexico. And Mexico is the main auto parts supplier to the U.S. Most of those companies are U.S. companies which have set up shop in Mexico. And we're also now very important in the electric and electronic sector, so that, in fact, Mexico produces $143 billion worth of electrical and electronic equipment, which is traded between our country and yours. That's the total trade. We are especially good at building home appliances and flat television screens. All of this would not have been possible without NAFTA. We point out that when Mexico exports, the U.S. exports, because there is a 40% U.S. value added in Mexico exports to the U.S. In other words, most of the goods manufactured in Mexico already have 40% of U.S. Production parts. So they're assembled in both countries. It's an interconnected system. I'm not an economist. Some of you are and understand this better. Currently, in the discussions surrounding NAFTA, the United States wants more of the components that are put into parts or into final goods to be manufactured in the U.S. We're open to discussion. We don't adhere to a certain number. So for automobiles, if the U.S. wants to raise it all the way to 80%, I think, but maybe we're going to reach something like 60%. We're open to the U.S. position. It's very important that I say this. Another area is trade and services. So, number one, manufacturing, basically cars, auto parts, electric, and electronic, okay? So big companies here in Wisconsin, to give an example, Rockwell, Johnson Controls, they have operations set up in Mexico, but they don't re-export directly. The parts are assembled here and other parts in Mexico. The final product is binational or trinational. That's the essence of the agreement, of the trade agreement. Nowadays, we also have a very important trade in services, which include financial, and of course, we add travel there. Tourism is very important, as you very well know. But we're also partners in energy. Mexico is the U.S. largest energy market. In spite of what I said about manufacturing, we still do produce oil. And Mexico exports crude oil to the United States, and the U.S. exports gasoline to Mexico because we don't have the capacity to manufacture all the gasoline the country needs. We are realistic, and we're not a closed economy. So if the gas comes from the U.S., but we send you the oil, it's okay with us. This is one area, by the way, energy, which has to be modernized in the new NAFTA. We're open to it, yeah, but I'm not privy to all the details because the negotiators, as you know, they keep all the cards close to their chest. So what I know is what you know, what you read in the media. I don't have any special information. Agricultural products, very important. Mexico is the third destination for U.S. agricultural products and its second largest source of imports. Again, we can work on this. We know that the U.S. agricultural sector, just like the manufacturing sector, are very keen on NAFTA. In this state, dairy and agriculture as a whole are interested in my country because they do export. Mexico has a deficit in certain commodities like grains, and of course, even milk products are very important for us. So we can skip through this. Let's go back one. Part of NAFTA includes even the fact that cattle from Mexico they cross the border. They are allowed to cross the border. They don't need papers. This occurs in the Arizona Sonora area. So the cows are brought over to the U.S. and I believe it happens the other way around. So we do have an intense market in agriculture and also in cattle, hogs, and poultry. We absorb 20% of the United States meat exports, by the way. Okay? Why? Because we're your neighbor. We're next door. We have 125 million people. It's easier to deal with someone next door than to go to the other side of the world to export. And companies know that. It's easier yes, we recognize labor is cheap in Mexico. That's something which can only be solved through creation of wealth. It cannot be solved, like some trade unions, especially in Canada, think wrongly, by someone ordering the minimum wage in Mexico to go up 500%. Workers in companies which trade within NAFTA earn at least 2 or 3 times more than their counterparts who work in local Mexican businesses. And it's a gradual process. Wealth, in order to raise your salaries, you have to have wealth to back it up. If you do it just by a government order, you're going to create inflation and mess up the macroeconomic environment. That's what some individuals do not understand when they talk about Mexico having cheap labor. It's not cheap compared to what it was 20, 30 years ago. And the guys who work in automobile industry, they're the best paid workers in the country. And we also now have an area of the country, Querétaro State, where they manufacture airplane parts. And we will be manufacturing the first full airplane. It's going to be a small variety, sort of like Learjet size, in Mexico, which is something that Brazil already does, but Mexico is becoming a hub for that. Remember that name of that state, Querétaro. We have, well, in the last slide, which I really went over very quickly, it just shows you which state have more, whose jobs depend on trade and goods. Of course, California is number one. The dark blue ones are the ones that have the most dependence, where jobs are created by trade with Mexico. In Wisconsin, it's 96,000. It's not comparable to the 555,000 in California, but you're up there. Mexico, like the United States, so many companies invest in my country that I would be unable to mention them all now. But I do want to say that my country also invests in the United States. We do have important companies in Mexico, and they're all eager to send their resources to the United States. So here we see some names. You're not familiar with some of them. Some of them don't necessarily have business in this part of the country. So at this time, we wish to expand. We are open to expanding NAFTA. The next round of negotiations is in April. We want to streamline regional integration. We want the logistics to improve so that the trucks can get across much faster. We want to strengthen the regional value chains, which is the term economists use for stuff being manufactured in both countries, or in the three in some cases. So at the end of the day, if NAFTA is modernized, there will be more liberalization. The economies of the three countries will be more competitive. There will be innovation, trade facilitation, regulatory cooperation, border efficiency, which is part of what we have to modernize. And these so-called supply chains will be updated. Again, the part that is of the goods manufactured in Mexico, the part that is manufactured in the U.S., we're willing to have the percentage go up, especially in automobiles, which I know is part of the U.S. position. So instead of it being around 62%, the highest acceptable, we're open to discussions. Maybe not the 85% the U.S. government is demanding. But as you can see then, Mexico is a manufacturing powerhouse. Mexico has a lot of potentials in energy. And very important, you have to bear in mind that Mexico, in this administration we will finalize on December 1st, has modernized its rules and regulations. So we had a vast regulatory reform. The energy sector is open for business. So U.S. companies are going down there to explore and extract oil. And for the first time, we'll have gas stations with a U.S. logo company on them. So we hope that the new NAFTA will have the three basic elements of a shared assessment that reflects a balanced perception of the benefits for each country, a recognition that there is room for modernization and a win-win proposition. The outcome of the process must generate benefits for all. And, well, very, very quickly, we can see that why Wisconsin is so important to Mexico, because in the case of Wisconsin, there's nothing to complain about. We have a deficit with Wisconsin, and we're not cutting down the relationship. You export more than we import. Okay, that's such is life. Economists will explain that that's not such a problem, trade deficits. You don't have to concentrate so much on something. So elementary, you have to look at the broad picture. So the data I have is that we have close to $6 billion in trade between our two countries. And in 25 years, Mexico went from being the 7th market to the 2nd for Wisconsin. What are Wisconsin's chief exports to Mexico? Machinery, transportation equipment, computer and electronic parts, electrical equipment, appliances and components, fabricated metal products. What does this mean? Because it means that Wisconsin and Mexico's manufacturing centers have a lot in common. Because Mexico, at the same time, also exports electrical equipment to Wisconsin, also exports motor vehicle parts, and in fact, fully finished motor vehicles, as well as electrical equipment and components, a lot of electromedical measuring and control instruments. All this through these companies like Johnson & Johnson or Rockwell Automation that work out of Wisconsin. Here we see that that your exports are basically out of, again, I mentioned them already. And there's also, of course, in agriculture, soybeans are very important part of the process. Okay. I just wanted to add that for us, the priority in NAFTA is to strengthen competitiveness. You were talking about spelling, that's a tough one. Even in Spanish, competitiveness in North America, okay? That's our point of view. Number two, we want to advance in the area of regional trade, making it inclusive and responsible, okay? So we want to take advantage of opportunities in the 21st century. Basically, all the online sector, that wasn't part of the treaty in 1994. There was hardly any internet then. We want that to become part of the project. So they're talking about that as a lot of issues are now dealt with in the online world. And very important is to strengthen the energy sector included in the new trade agreement, so that Mexican and the United States can work together. You can keep on sending us gas, and we can keep on sending you oil. Although you have a lot of oil, but I understand we help you fill up your reserves. We also, at the same time, agree that the legal, let's say the regulatory scheme which is currently operating NAFTA has to be modernized so that companies can feel more comfortable when they go down to Mexico, and at the same time, your markets here can feel that there's fair trade. So we're in the best. We our government is serious. We are not in any way tied with one view or one vision. So the 6th round of negotiations will start in April. Hopefully we can get the agreement signed before July, because on July 1st, we elect the president in Mexico. And as in any other country, that will make matters a bit more complicated, because while he or she is president-elect, there will be sort of like a pause in Mexico. So I prefer to answer questions. I have some material which I might use as cheat notes, but we can go ahead. If I went too fast, ask me, and I'll consult the slide again. So we can start. I see one hand there. Yes, sir. I hope.
My name is Majid Sarmadi. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it. My question is in regard to global warming, and sending agricultural product to Mexico or vice versa. As we have less water in southern part of United States, in California, are you ready for changes and what that's going to affect? How is the water situation in your country? And how, because anytime that we are sending something to you, we are exporting billions of gallons of water that we call it virtual water, that it comes for cultivation of those products. And there will be a time that water is a big problem for us and you.
Well, Mexico it tends to be is not, let's say, a country with very many water resources. That's one of the reasons agriculture is limited in the country. There are very many dry areas. This said, Mexico is one of the most active countries in global warming. We've participated in all the committees at the international level, the Paris Agreement, all that. And I'm sure that our trade negotiators are taking this into account to make the new treaty a greener one. Definitely a very important issue. And I believe in my government there are people who are up to this challenge and are going to take it into account. Just one final thing I didn't say. The financial sector is also one where we're willing to open it up more in Mexico. So we have few U.S. banks with an actual presence down there. The most important one is Citicorp. But under a new NAFTA, we would not oppose a further participation of the financial sector in my country.
Thank you so much for coming here and presenting Mexico's point of view. My name is Frank Stein. I have a question regarding the employment impact of NAFTA. You mentioned that auto workers are the highly paid workers in Mexico. And that if all of a sudden Mexico now has to reduce the number of auto parts sent to the United States, that would definitely affect, I would think, the employment market and the quality of life of these people who are getting good salaries in Mexico. What is the unemployment rate now in Mexico, and what would be the implications of changes in NAFTA, especially with the auto industry, in terms of the impact on unemployment?
Yeah, definitely. Let's say we don't come to an agreement. What would happen then is that in Mexico there would be a shock, let's say an economic shock, but apparently there is a strategy to get us out of there by intensifying trade with Asia and Europe and with Latin America. But as in the auto sector, you're right. They would have to gear those cars to go somewhere else. Many people could potentially lose their jobs. The unemployment in Mexico is rather low, the official unemployment, although there is a lot of what you call, we call it in Spanish sub-employment, which is people who are self-employed in small shops, etc. The official figure is 4% for unemployment of men between the age of 18 and 60 or something like that. That's the official figures for what we call formal sector of the economy. So it's not really a problem. And I repeat, it's not that we're on the side of big industry. It's that we have since 1982 a realistic economic policy. You don't print money from a central bank just so people can have more in their pockets, and you don't raise wages just because the president decides that's the way to go. So the partners in NAFTA have to understand that we're a much poorer country, but we can certainly help the North America as a whole in manufacturing through the automobile industry, and those workers will be getting higher salaries in the future. Hopefully, what you say about losing jobs won't happen, because they would have to start looking for other jobs in Mexico towards the internal, directed at the domestic market. There's a lot of potential for automobile sales domestically. Anyone else? Well. I wanted to add something very important. The Consulate of Mexico is open for business since July 2016. We're going on now towards our second anniversary. It's important for you to know that if you're in business, we have contacts with the regional office that promotes trade. Basically, they would want, of course, trade geared towards Mexico. So if anyone here has a company which maybe is interested in exporting to Mexico and isn't doing it yet, I could contact them. I can give you my card if anyone is interested. I would have a direct channel to the Office of Trade Promotion in Chicago, and we could have an officer from that office come up and interview you or go to your company. Several deals have been struck, so to say, in Wisconsin. And of course, we want to thank the folks at the WEDC, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, because they have been extremely supportive of trade, not just with Mexico, with many countries. But in the case of Mexico, WEDC has actually spearheaded the trade mission of the governor, the vice governor, and another one, which was for the private sector. And so they're looking for your parts, your goods to be sent to other areas of Mexico, and all within the framework of a new, modernized, more intelligent, so to speak, NAFTA. So I just wanted to say that comment. Any other questions?
My name is Nick DePitz, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine. One of the big ways that Americans are spending in Mexico has been through tourism. And if I'm not mistaken, tourism dollars are down because of the rising crime, for lack of a better word. And I realize you're dealing with issues of people coming in from Guatemala, et cetera. What is being done to mitigate that?
Well, just this week we had the Secretary of Tourism was in New York talking to key tour operators. We have to distinguish the problem of security in the country with tourism. The tourism zones, as they call them, the ones, especially the beach destinations, are essentially safe. And our aim is to continue promoting those areas because tourism is together with manufacturing, and even today, oil exports, the most important, let's say, point of origin of dollars in my country. So there would not be a specific chapter on tourism, but as we are going to promote services, that can be taken into account. The government is making a great effort in the so-called tourist corridors to ensure the safety of all people. But there was an unfortunate situation where some people were given a drink that wasn't fully, let's say, it wasn't 100% alcoholic beverage. There was something added. One American girl passed away. The government of Mexico is very upset about this having gone on in the private sector and is investigating the matter. This was in the Cancun area. So much so that the Secretary of Tourism put it on as one of his priorities to solve that situation. Any other questions? And well, we are open on Prospect Avenue in Milwaukee, and you're welcome. If you know any Mexican people who do not yet know about us, tell them. We issue their passports and other documents. And for Americans who need to get some kind of a visa, which, as I was explaining to my lunch partners, rarely does an American need a visa. But if your company is sending you down there to stay, or you're going to retire in Mexico, then you probably would need to call us or email us. I can give you that information. Thank you very much. hope I didn't go too quickly with the slide.
No, you were good. You were good. Thank you again, General Counsel or Consul General. I get them mixed up. Consul General Adem. We are adjourned.